comedy shorts were used as openers for the program. You would have a short, you maybe have a newsreel, a cartoon, and then you would have your feature. But the shorts were really kind of the openers.
Okay.
So, yeah, it was for everybody, really. It wasn't, because you would think with animals, oh, they'd be more geared towards children. Because you think of some of the Disney films later where, they were really geared to kids, but it was very general at this time.
Hi, my name is Juliana Roth, and this is Conversations with Animals. So, hi, Steve. Thank you so much for being here today.
Juliana, it's nice to be invited and to sit here and chat with you.
Great. So before we start, I was wondering if you could introduce yourself and tell us what your passions are as a researcher, librarian.
Sure. Well, I'm a research librarian for the New York Public Library at the New York Public Library for the Performing Arts at Lincoln Center. And I spend a lot of time, we have the theater on film and tape archive. And I spend about half of my time there, and we have a screening room because we tape Broadway and off-Broadway shows, and then the researchers can come and see them. So I work in the screening room, and then I'm part of the theater division, and I help identify a lot of earlier stage photographs, the stage production. So I've been helping to identify the people who are in the photographs. So that's what I do here. And then outside of the library for the last, 35 years, I've been programming silent film programs and writing books about silent film comedy. And so that's, I've done programs for the Museum of Modern Art, and the Library of Congress, and in Europe at the Pordenone Silent Film Festival and different festivals like that. So, and then Ben Modell and I have the Silent Comedy Watch Party, which we do. It's a live on stream, or a live streaming program that we started when the pandemic with the shutdown. And so our episode next month will be our 100th episode and our 4th year anniversary of doing it.
Wow.
And it's been great because we did it because we wanted to kind of reach out when everybody was stuck inside, and it's free on YouTube. And people started watching it around the world and still watching it. We were doing it every week originally, every Sunday, but now we do it once a month.
Wow.
So I think that sort of gives you the overview.
Yeah. And I know I found you because of the animal comedian silent film exhibit you were doing, and now knowing more of your research overall is that like subject. So
silent comedy, silent film comedy.
Yeah,
that's really this. And we do a series here at the Library for the Performing Arts called the Silent Clown Film Series, and we do a screening a month. And then the one screening that you noticed was about the animals.
Yes,
because there were plenty of starring animals in silent films, because there was no sound, so the trainers could tell the animal what to do from behind the camera, so they could give them directions, and they would, they could do it. So.
Yeah. And I know you wrote once that it was kind of bad career move to have a scene with an animal.
Oh, well, that's an old actor.
Yeah.
That's an old actor thing. Yeah, actors are reluctant to work with animals and babies. Mm-hmm. Because that's where all the attention's going to go. People are, oh, the baby's so cute, or oh, the animal's so cute, and ignore them. So, yeah, that's the old rule among actors.
So when was the first time that we started seeing the animals in film?
Pretty early, from the very beginning, because the very beginning of film is they were going to basically photograph anything that moved. So animals, again, are naturally interesting. So they would turn up in a lot of the very early films in the late 1800s. It wasn't until the teens in America that they became stars. It was the Americans. The Europeans used a lot of animals in their comedies or in their films, but it was really the Americans that made them the stars. They would have a whole series, of Brownie the Wonder Dog or Napoleon and Sally, the chimpanzees. So, but I would say the mid-teens was when it really took off. And then in the 20s, you also had animal stars like Rin Tin Tin, who's a dramatic animal, and other imitators like Fearless the detective dog and things like that, you know.
Yeah, it was fascinating to see how they went from being co-stars to being actually the main character and the driver of those stories.
I mean, it was Rin Tin Tin who kind of saved Warner Brothers in the 20s because he was such big box office, and Warner Brothers weren't doing that so well in the 20s. Rin Tin Tin kind of put him over, and then, of course, The Jazz Singer, the first sound film, really put them over. Mm-hmm. But, so there were there were elephants who acted regularly, and bears and lions, you know, everybody. And then they had different handlers for all kinds of animals. And in silent comedies, they use skunks a lot, you know, for the gag, you know, because the smell bad, or some little kid will think it's a kitty and bring it in, and everybody faints or runs away. But there was a handler, you know, handlers who handled skunks. Whatever the movies needed, you know, they had people that would handle the animals.
And was it mostly directed towards family film or general audience, or were these animals?
It's a very general audience, these comedy shorts. I mean, it really was for a general audience. Of course, kids appreciated them and loved them, but the adults did too. And they were usually, the comedy shorts were used as openers for the program. You would have a short, you maybe have a newsreel, a cartoon, and then you would have your feature. But the shorts were really kind of the openers. Okay. So, yeah, it was for everybody, really. It wasn't, because you would think with animals, they'd be more geared towards children. Mm-hmm. Because you think of some of the Disney films later where, you know, they were really geared to kids. But it was very general at this time. Yeah.
It seems, in general, were the gags in the film like these sort of slapstick humor moments, or were there ever these, like, more dramatic undertakings?
Well, they, you know, I mean, in the slapstick films, they did kind of stay to that. But I've seen, as far as dramatic films, there's a 1929 American film called The Four Feathers. It's based on the famous story. And there's a little boy with the monkey, and the monkey has a dramatic death scene. The monkey sacrifices himself to save the little boy. Mm-hmm. So they did sometimes have dramatic scenes. There's another comedy, it's called Penrod and Sam. And this was a series of stories by Booth Tarkington about a boy named Penrod and his friends. And they made some films out of them. And then the second film, his dog has it. You know, mostly funny, but then there's a dramatic death scene when the dog is hit by a car. Mm. So the the animals would have dramatic scenes as well as comedic things too.
So if you were going to tell people where to start with animal comedians, who are the characters who come to mind for you?
I would start, there are two dogs that I would start with, and they're fairly common. If people go to, say, maybe YouTube, they would find them. And they both worked for Max Sennett and Keystone Films. One was the dog of Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle. His name was Luke, and a lot of people have seen these films. And there are films like Fatty's Plucky Pup and things like that. And Luke has a lot of personality. Mm-hmm. And I would recommend him. And then Teddy, the Great Dane, that he became a true Max Sennett star. And they would use his name in the titles of the films. There's one called Teddy at the Throttle, where Gloria Swanson's tied to a railroad track, and it's Teddy who saves the day, goes and gets help and helps get her untied from the track. So Teddy was was a Max Sennett star until 1924. Mm-hmm. So he had like a kind of a 10-year run. So I would start there, because you could definitely find them on YouTube or find examples that they could view.
Yeah. And I was reading the essay you have on the library website about the sort of relationship with the circus and the Ringling Brothers and things. How did that relationship, was that there from the start, as where they would get the animals?
Well, yeah, often it would. There was a zoo that was started in Los Angeles by a producer, William Selig, and he started the Selig Zoo, which would not only supply the animals, but was also a tourist attraction. It was a real zoo, and tourists could go. Also, from the circuses came the trainers. who supplied the animals for the films or trained the animals for the films. Most of them had their background in circuses, whether it was in Europe or America. But yeah, that's where a lot of the animals, and some of the animals came from vaudeville too. There was an elephant who was in films in the late 20s. Her name was Minnie. And she had been part of a vaudeville act for a guy named Max Gruber. And he had a little menagerie, and he toured vaudeville. And Minnie was part of it, so he actually had this elephant that he traveled with in vaudeville. And they played with Buster Keaton. They played with the Three Keatons, which was a vaudeville act. And so, yeah, there was a lot of like circus and vaudeville roots to these animals, you know.
And I'm interested, because of those time periods and vaudeville and all this, were there like ever, I'm trying to think of the right phrase for it, ways that animals were used to maybe mock or imitate kind of, I know this was like race film starting at the time too. Did you ever see, I don't know, the animals used in a way to, in an exploitative way?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's always the issue of how well were the animals treated. Sometimes they were made to do things that I think weren't natural for them, you know, because they're doing things on screen or they're mocking. Sometimes they're spoofing human films, too. There was a series that Hal Roach produced called The Dippy Doodads, and it was mostly, the stars were like monkeys, but there were ducks and chickens, and they had kind of a whole alternate animal universe. But sometimes they would have like a shoe shiner, and it would be a monkey kind of in blackface. So I've seen a little bit of that. Not too much with the animals, but a little bit.
Yeah. Because I'm just thinking it's interesting, those like kind of parallel timelines of, of history and how it overlapped.
With silent film, unfortunately, there were a lot of ethnic stereotypes. Some of it came from vaudeville, where there were Irish comedians, but you know, there were a lot of Asian stereotypes and black stereotypes. Often they would have a white actor in blackface or yellowface in the comedies, and then they're playing these, they run laundries for the Asian characters or things like that. So there is a lot of that, unfortunately, that survives.
Yeah.
But because of the time period.
Definitely, yeah. And it seems like maybe the emergence of like the animal protections in film kind of mirrored the critiques of of things like blackface as well.
I think so. So. And again, that sort of started in the 30s, where they were more aware of how animals were treated in films. But in the teens, in the 1920s, unfortunately, it was kind of wide open.
Yeah.
And there are stories of trainers who had the animals for years and was very good to them, treated them very well. But then there were stories of a couple other trainers that weren't very good. So. Yeah.
Do you know? This isn't. I don't know if this is in your research at all. But was there like a very strong pet culture at the same time as these films, or do you think the films maybe informed having more pets in the home? I know dogs have kind of always been with us.
Well, dogs, and I'm sure dogs and cats, that people had plenty at the time. I'm sure I must have came from that because, people always respond to dog and cats. And there were a couple of Max Sennett, again, had 2 stars. There was Pepper, who was a gray cat, and then Puzzums, or Puzzums, I think is how it was pronounced. But they were very popular. And I know there's a couple of fan mail that Pepper would get a lot of fan mail from children. And then they'd send back a little note with a paw print on it, sort of stamp paw print kind of thing. And Teddy, too. He would get a lot of fan mail. And there are photos of him, signing his fan mail or putting his paw print on it and stuff. So I think, people having pets is part of the appeal of these animal stars. Is a good part of it, I think. Not so much, with the bears or the lions, but definitely the dogs and cats.
Yeah. I'm sure you're not surprised then to see all the like cat videos on the internet.
Yeah, I think it just comes. It's the same. It just comes from that, the grumpy cat video and things like that.
Do you think animals are? I don't know if safer is the right word, but there's something about animals that can be more universal in terms of their comedic appeal.
I think so. And they have a lot of personality too. You take, for instance, the famous dog Pete the Pup, who's part of our gang, or the Little Rascals, the dog with the ring around his eye. And Pete, when you watch him, it's like he never seems to be taking orders from off camera. He seems to be there and watching what's going on and reacting. So he has so much personality. And I think it's very easy for people to relate to the animals and sort of imbue them with a personality kind of thing.
Yeah.
So.
Do you have favorite animal gags?
I'm trying to think. There is one gag I like. It's in a Mickey Maguire comedy. And Mickey Maguire was Mickey Rooney. When he was a kid, he played this character from the comic strips. And there is a gag where somehow they get a hold of an elephant. I forget exactly what contrived how, but the elephant, and they have a clubhouse because they're like these poor kids. So they have like an our gang kind of built clubhouse, but the elephant ends up in the clubhouse and sees a mouse. So it starts running, and the clubhouse is running down the street, and you see the elephant legs, and the kids are inside running along because they have to, because the house is moving. And it's a great gag because they show the house going down the street. They kind of show the impossible actually happening. And I'm trying to think of some other, there's just some great moments with the dogs. And there's one where its pal rescues, often with the dogs, they're rescuing children. And the same thing, there's a chimp, Snooky the Human Z, who had her own series, and she's usually rescuing a baby or something like that. So even in the comedies, there's a certain melodramatic kind of plot going on. And I remember one with Pal, with the baby. He's in a wash tub, and he goes over a little waterfall, but the dog jumps in to save, but it's this huge... The camera's way back, and you see the dog take this really dramatic leap and jump into the water to save the baby. That's very impressive.
Yeah. It sounds like there's a lot of heroic narratives for the animals. Are there ever stories where they're the villain? Maybe animal-to-animal villain, like the skunk.
I think animal-to-animal, especially in that series I mentioned before, the Dippy Doo Dads, because their whole thing was spoofing regular films and melodramas. So, there'd be... there's a boxing story called The Knockout, but they would take the movie cliches, and so some animal had to play the villain. In it's usually a romance thing where there's a bad guy who kidnaps the girl, and then the hero monkey has to save her, kind of thing. They did a lot of that. So yeah, especially when they're making fun of films,
right?
Serious films.
Yeah. That's interesting, that impulse to show them in that light, right? Especially because our larger culture at that time, and still a lot of times, monkeys are going to be in a cage, or animals
in a zoo.
Yeah, or used as food or something. It's interesting that actually they were kind of glorified in these films.
Well, there are people and humanized to a certain. When sound came in, animated cartoons took over a lot of that, and you had Pluto, Mickey Mouse's dog. Well, you had Mickey Mouse too, but. In Buster Keaton's Go West, his co-star is Brown Eyes the cow. And of course you were talking about animals used for food, but he's very, he's making this cow his co-star.
Yeah.
So.
Kind of radical, yeah.
I know, at the time.
Yeah. Why do you think it's important to have, these shared comedy films? You've spent so many years with it and work with so many different kinds of people thinking about it. Like, what does comedy do for us?
Well, I do think it's very universal, and it's a release. It's they're fun, they're funny. You can kind of forget everything that's going on, and I think because they're so universal, they do bring up a lot of laughter, and I think it's kind of entertainment we need just to forget things for a while, and they're so stylized, kind of unreal, so it's easier to laugh and really enjoy them.
Yeah.
You don't have to think very much, there's not a lot of thought-provoking content. It's just more visceral,
And I know your specialty is the silent films, but I'm curious, when sound came into play, did that shift the animal storytelling at all? Did it move more towards animation? Or
I think it did. Initially, when sound first came in, there are a couple of series that starred animals. There was something called MGM produced a bunch of what they called Dogville comedies, and the whole cast were dogs. They still show these on TCM. They're very elaborate, little sets, and the dogs are in costumes. And again, they're spoofs of films like All Quiet on the Western Front was So Quiet on the Canine Front. And it's a war film with the dogs in the trenches. And they would dub in dialogue. They would give the dogs taffy. And they'd be chewing. So then they would dub in dialogue. So, and they did there was a big film, a musical, The Broadway Melody, and they did the Dogway Melody and things. And they're very elaborate. And they were 2 reels. They were 20 minutes long, which is kind of long. And then there was another group, another studio kind of tried to jump in with all chimps called the Tiffany Chimps. And again, they did spoofs of popular films at the time. But as it kind of progressed, animated films kind of took it up more. You had Mickey Mouse and you had Pluto and all the Disney. They were all animals, Donald Duck, and it kind of went that way. And then the animals in movies became sort of sidekicks where they were well known. If you had the Thin Man films, they had their dog Asta, who's in the series, and Asta was a popular character. The Blondie films, based on the comic strip, had Daisy, who was their dog, who was a character, but it was more kind of a support character. And, of course, there were always animals in Westerns because they were riding horses and things like that, but often they didn't really become characters.
That's interesting that they got marginalized in a way once sound came in.
That's true. Yeah. I guess because, you couldn't suspend the disbelief as much that they were really characters, or you couldn't really humanize them in your mind because of the sound, and everything was much more natural kind of thing.
Yeah.
So they were really, really animals at this point, except for those few cases like Asta and things like that.
Do you think the storylines got more violent with the animated films? Like, I'm thinking now, I feel like the ones that come to mind, there's more like animal death or
Well, there's certainly, if you want to go Tom and Jerry,
right,
things
Tom
like
and
that.
Jerry.
It's pretty, of course, nobody dies, but top of Tom's head gets blown off often. Where the bullet just lops off the top of his head, or you get a lot more violent. Although this silent comedy can be pretty violent. Again, it's stylized because it's silent. It's not, it's removed. But the animated films, the Bugs Bunny cartoons, are violent. I mean, so there was a lot of violence in the animation. Kind of stepped up the violence.
Yeah. Was that like a shift, do you think, in like the comedic sensibility, or was it? I mean, I guess we can't say for sure, but
I think a lot of it. Yeah, I think it was the comedic sensibility changed. It got in the 1930s and 1940s. In the 1930s, in films, they had what they called the screwball comedies, and they're a little more acerbic. And it was taken further in the 1940s. There was a director named Preston Sturges who kind of specialized in rapid dialogue and very acerbic kind of things. And I think the cartoons reflected that as well. And the Bugs Bunny cartoons. Bugs Bunny is a very acerbic character and wise guy and this kind of thing. But, I think they stepped up the violence.
Yeah. And I know you said it's not necessarily your area of specialty, but you did have an example of one way animals were sort of harmed in the filmmaking that might have set groundwork.
Well, they certainly, there was a film called The Charge of the Light Brigade, and it was an Errol Flynn film. I think it was in 1936, Warner Brothers. And there was a lot of battle scenes where they're on horses, and they used tripwires to bring the horses down, and a lot of the horses were hurt and had to be shot because their legs were broken and things like that. And that started a whole movement to really police what was being done. There was another incident in a film, Jesse James, from 1939, where Jesse and Frank James were trying to get away from the sheriffs or whatever, and they on their horses, they dive off a cliff into a river below, but one of the horses was killed. So, I mean, it's things like that that finally motivated Hollywood to, you know, to be more accountable for how they treated the animals.
Yeah. I know you have a book with you.
Oh, yes.
I was wondering if you'd want to share a little bit about the essay and kind of your research interests overall, even beyond the animals. But I know,
I've written, I guess, about 7 books now on silent comedy, and usually my real field of interest are areas that have been neglected. I mean, there's almost a book written every week on Charlie Chaplin or on Buster Keaton, but I always look for the people that I don't understand why they've been neglected, because some of the films are there and they're really good and they were very popular in their day. So those are the aspects that I really look for. And the book, this was a sequel to a book I'd written previously called Lame Brains and Lunatics, and this has the clever title, Lame Brains and Lunatics 2. And there's an essay on the silent comedy Animals, and it's 250 pages. I think, actually, I should have just made it its own book.
Yeah.
That's what my wife was telling me at the time. But I wrote this during the pandemic, the shutdown.
That's
so
amazing.
I was just writing, I had a lot of time.
Yeah.
So it's about 800 pages. So.
Okay, I'm excited to look at it. If you want to talk about any of are there particular arguments in that animal essay that stand out to you, or is it just a deep dive?
Just a deep dive. It is a deep dive, and it starts with the beginning and the European films. I talk about them in the beginning, and then go to the American films and kind of how. But I think I do it by animal. I sort of have an introduction to set it all up, and then I go by, first it's dogs and then monkeys and and then it's just sort of farmyard, because there were films that starred horses. There was Sally the horse and Queenie the horse. There were some films that starred mules. There was a series with Fanny the mule, and so I try to get into all of them.
Wow.
It's sort of mind-boggling to think that there were that many series that starred animals, but they were.
Did you notice, were there like classes of animals, for instance, like were the farm animals in a general different kind of scenario than maybe a dog was, or was it kind of varied based on the film?
It kind of varied, because some of the ones with like Queenie the horse would almost be doing some of the same things that the dogs would be doing as far as stories and things. They're usually helping their masters or their human friends. I mean, that was a lot of it, where the animals would just sort of try to help, whatever problems their human owner were having. The dogs were usually there to try and help, and all the animals like that. Interesting.
Yeah, I'm really excited to do some watching, because
there's a lot of the films are out there.
Yeah,
I mean, YouTube is a great resource, because there's a lot of things that you can find there.
Great. And before we wrap up, I'd just love to hear more. Is there anything that you're currently working on that you want to share? I mean, it sounds like you are always working on something.
Well,
so.
Yeah, I do have a new book that I'm working on, and everyone knows Harold Lloyd. I mean, if you know silent comedy, he's a famous comedian hanging on the clock, the famous image. People know that image, even if they don't know Harold's films, and he had the glasses. And but when he started in films, he had a different character, and it was a character somewhat based on Charlie Chaplin, because Chaplin was popular, and he played the tramp character. So Harold Lloyd had a character called Lonesome Luke, and he and Hal Roach started a company. And a lot of people started little companies at this time, 1914, 1915, but a lot of them didn't succeed. But they succeeded, and Luke became popular. But if it hadn't, there wouldn't have been Our Gang, there wouldn't have been Laurel and Hardy, there wouldn't have been Charlie Chase, there wouldn't have been the mature Harold Lloyd films. So I'm writing a book about Lonesome Luke films, because no one has, and I think it really needs to be covered, but it's a book that Harold Lloyd would have hated, because he was embarrassed by the Lonesome Luke films later, because he didn't start out originally to be a comedian. He didn't have experience in vaudeville as a comedian.
Mm-hmm.
He was an actor, but he wanted to be a serious actor. Mm-hmm. But when he and Hal Roach started making these films, they needed a comic, so Harold became the comedian by default. So he had to learn to be a comic. And in these Lonesome Luke films, he's learning. So Harold was kind of embarrassed by them, because his later films are so good, but these are,
Yeah.
And he didn't like the character. He thought it was too much of a ripoff of Chaplin.
Mm-hmm.
So the minute he could move on, he did.
Mm-hmm.
But he had to threaten to quit.
Wow.
He said he didn't want to do it anymore. And he came up with this new character of kind of an average young man in glasses. And it just clicked with audiences, loved it. And then he moved on and made some really great films and became a great comedy filmmaker.
Wow.
So anyway, that's the new project.
That sounds really, I'm excited for that.
But I have, I'm sort of getting material from Harold's granddaughter,
Oh, cool.
Suzanne Lloyd. And so...
Is she a filmmaker, or is she just an archivist interested
she's
in
an
it?
archivist,
Yeah, okay, cool.
with
Yeah.
Harold's films.
Okay, cool.
And his memorabilia, because he kept everything. He kept all his photographs, and it's amazing
Wow.
collection.
Yeah.
So.
I don't want to put you on the spot, Alex, but I know we have you both here, so is there anything about the library here, resources you would want to speak to in general of how people can, make use of what's special about this library?
Well, I think what's really special is how eclectic it is. I mean, the scope of the material that we have. I mean, I'm talking, of course, my bent would be coming from the theater division,
Mm-hmm.
but in music and dance as well. I mean, just the vast scope of the materials that we have here that, viewers or researchers can access. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah. Steve said it better.
Well, I know the first day I worked here, they told me to report at 9:00, but nothing really starts here till 10. So I was here, and there was someone in the theater division, and I'm just sitting around. And they said, "Well, you want to help put stuff away?" And I'm like, "Sure." So we went in the stacks for the first time, and I'm helping to put things away, but then you're putting it in a box, and you find a clipping or a playbill for Buffalo Bill Cody's Wild West show and things like just amazing things that oh my gosh, so it's incredible collection.
That's wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you want me to say.
Yeah, if you we want to come sit. I also, if you have to go, it's okay.
No,
I didn't want to put you on the spot.
I finished my work, so I put my laptop away. No, I think what Steve said was perfect. And, we have everything from dance, music, and recorded sounds. We have, some stuff that, goes back all the way to the 1800s for recorded sound, like wax cylinders and, some of the earliest ever recorded sound technology. And then dance as well. In addition to theater and film.
Mm-hmm.
So people are here, researching it, the material, seeing it for themselves. You have a lot of writers like Steve who are doing their own kind of research, people who are just interested in it. But then we also have these exhibitions that kind of use that material and, make it a little bit more accessible for people who are don't want to just, do it for their own research. They just want to see it presented in a way.
Great.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
And then programs, of course. Which
Yeah.
you
I mean,
referred
we're
to.
constantly doing programs
Yeah.
and exhibitions. And
And you have your own gallery, museum here.
Oh,
That's very cool.
2 big galleries, really.
Yeah.
3, actually.
Oh,
Yeah, that's
wow.
right.
We have a corridor space.
That's right, the corridor space.
Yeah.
Yes. So there's a lot of exhibitions happening all the time.
Yeah. I think it's just like the geography of this area. It's beautiful to have a research center in front of working art spaces.
Mhm.
You have so many iconic venues right next door.
No, it's a great location,
Yeah.
being part of Lincoln Center.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's how the library was formed. Steve probably knows better than I do, but when Lincoln Center was being built and they were going to have all these institutions, the Lincoln Center organizers approached New York Public Library and they're like, "Do you want to set up shop here, have a library with performing arts archives?" And they had already had different iterations, basically libraries that were doing different things like dance and music. So they'd put them all here. And the purpose of the library was initially to kind of support that ongoing archiving, but also to support the institutions that are really just on this campus. And so that's kind of how it started, and then of course expanded to be more about things all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
So I just said the other day that this is like Lincoln Center is like a big family, and we're like the family photo album.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right.
That's a great metaphor.
Yeah.
Well, thank you both.
Well, thank you.
This was really special, and I'm so glad we could do it live. I think this is actually the first one I've done live. I usually am doing them over Zoom, and it's just a better energy, I think.
Yeah, I think you get that energy going, which is really, really good. Cool.
Thank you.
Oh, thanks.
All right. Thank you so much for listening. Make sure that you join us on Substack at animal.julianaroth.com, where you can sign up for a newsletter where you get extra bonus doodles and different movement practices and other ways to relate to the non-human animals in our lives.